Welcome to the Discover Bittensor podcast. My name is Nick, and the objective of this podcast is very simple: to help normal people understand Bittensor. Because right now, I think a lot of people are misunderstanding it, not because they're not intelligent enough, and not because Bittensor is secretly simple and everyone else is just confused. I think the real reason is something else. I think many people misunderstand Bittensor because they keep asking the wrong kind of question. They keep asking, what's the product? And that sounds like a perfectly reasonable question. In fact, in most cases, it's exactly the right question. If someone starts a company, you want to know, what are they building, who is it for, what problem does it solve, and who pays for it. That's how we have learned to understand innovation. There's a product, there's a company, there are customers, and if the thing works, the company grows. That framework works so well that we almost apply it automatically. So when people first hear about Bittensor, they often ask something like, okay, but what is it actually building? And I think that's where the confusion starts. Because Bittensor may not be best understood as a company building a product, it may be better understood as something else entirely. A system for generating many different products, a framework for organizing many different markets, a machine for coordinating useful digital work. And if that is true, then a lot of the usual questions people ask about Bittensor are not exactly wrong, but they are too small. That's what I want to explore in this episode. Because I think once you stop looking for the product, Bittensor becomes much easier to understand and much bigger as well. So let's start with the normal model. If someone pitches you a startup, you expect a fairly familiar structure. Maybe they say, we are building accounting software for small businesses, or we are building a new AI coding assistant. We are building a marketplace for X. We are building a platform for whatever. And then the rest follows. There's a product, there are features, there's a target market, there's distribution, there's a revenue model. Even if the idea is ambitious, the basic shape is still familiar. The product sits at the center. The company exists to improve the product. And investors are mostly betting that if the product is good enough, and distribution is good enough, and execution is good enough, then the company becomes valuable. That's how we are trained to think. And because that framework is so dominant, people often try to understand Bittensor in the exact same way. They ask, what's the actual thing here? What does it do? What's the app? Where's the flagship product? What's the killer use case? And when they don't immediately find a single clear answer, they often become skeptical, which is understandable. Because Bittensor does not present itself like a normal startup. It doesn't say, here's our one application, or here's our software, or here's our subscription product. Instead, it presents something much stranger: a network, a token economy, a system of incentives, a collection of subnets, many different experiments happening at once, many different markets being formed at once. And for people looking for one neat product, that feels messy. It can feel unfinished. But what if that messiness is not a bug? What if that's the clue? I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is this: they assume that Bittensor should ultimately resolve into one dominant product, as if somewhere inside all the complexity there must be one obvious answer. But I don't think that's the right frame, because Bittensor may not be trying to be the product. It may be trying to be the environment in which products emerge, and that's a very different thing. Think about something like the internet itself. If someone had asked very early on, yes, but what's the product of the internet? That would have been a strange question, right? Because the internet was not one product. It was an enabling layer, a general infrastructure, a framework within which many products, companies, services, and markets could appear. The same is true for Linux. Linux is not the one app, it's the infrastructure, a base layer, an environment on top of which an enormous number of things can be built. And Bitcoin was misunderstood in a somewhat similar way. At first, many people looked at it and thought, but what is it really for? Was it PayPal? Was it gold? Was it a payments app? Was it libertarian money? Was it speculation machine? And part of the reason Bitcoin was so hard to categorize is that it wasn't fitting into one existing product category. It was a new kind of monetary network. And I think Bittensor may be difficult in a similar way, not because it has no purpose, but because its purpose is not one product. Its purpose may be to create a new kind of open economy for useful digital work that's bigger and also harder to mentally grasp. This becomes especially obvious when people look at subnets, because one of the first reactions people have is, these all seem unrelated, And on the surface, that's fair. You can look at different subnets and see things like weather prediction, storage, agents, model training, inference, crime or compliance related tooling, fake detection, data services, even things like poker. And people think, what the hell is going on here? What do these things even have to do with each other? I thought this was just decentralized AI. And if you're still using the startup product lens, the whole thing can look incoherent. Because it doesn't feel like one company going deeper into one niche. It feels like many strange mini industries appearing at once. And that's exactly why the startup lens breaks down. Because the common thread is not all of these subnets are one product family. The common thread is deeper. The common thread is a task exists. A market is formed around that task. Participants compete to provide useful output, and the network evaluates what's valuable. The network evaluates what's valuable. Rewards flow accordingly. That's the common structure. So what Bittensor is producing is not one product line. It is producing many competitive digital economies. And once you see it that way, the diversity starts to make more sense. The weather subnet does not need to resemble the storage subnet. The storage subnet does not need to resemble the agent subnet. The point is not that they look similar. The point is that they are all generated by the same coordination logic. That's the real product, not the subnet itself, the coordination logic. And this is where I think the most useful shift happens. Instead of thinking, what's the product? I think a better question is, what kind of machine is this? And my answer would be, Bittensor may be a machine for generating and coordinating open-ended digital innovation, which, fair enough, sounds abstract. So let me make it concrete. In a normal company, innovation is organized internally. A company hires people. Those people work on products. Managers decide priorities. Capital gets allocated internally, and eventually something is shipped. That's the classic model. Bittensor proposes something else. Instead of one company internally deciding what to build, the protocol creates incentive environments. Subnets define tasks. Participants compete. Validators evaluate usefulness. Rewards flow to what works. So instead of one company running one internal R&D department, you get many open competitive arenas. And those arenas are not limited to one category. That's why the system feels so broad. Because in principle, any category of useful digital work that can be defined, measured, and rewarded could become a subnet. That is a much bigger object than a startup. It's closer to an innovation engine. Not guaranteed to work, but if it works, much bigger. And this becomes even more important when you look at the current AI landscape. Because right now, most frontier AI development still happens inside large organizations, which isn't surprising, because AI is expensive, computers are expensive, and top talent is expensive. So naturally, the frontier has become concentrated. And that creates a world where many people can see that AI is becoming incredibly important, but they are mostly spectators. They can use the outputs, they can pay for the tools, they can maybe buy public stocks related to the theme, even though, for example, OpenAI and Anthropic are not available to the public yet as investors. But they cannot really participate directly in the production layer. And that's part of what makes Bittensor so unusual, because it asks, what if some parts of the AI economy and maybe some parts of the broader digital economy could be opened up into markets where contribution is rewarded directly? And that's a radically different idea. And if that is the correct lens, then once again, you stop asking, where is the product, and start asking, what happens if useful digital work becomes an open competitive market? That's a much more interesting question. And I also think this helps explain why some people get frustrated with Bittensor. Because if you are expecting a startup narrative, Bittensor can feel unsatisfying. Where's the simplicity? Where's the one-page product explanation? Where's the one killer app everyone can instantly understand? And the answer may simply be, that's not what this is, or at least not primarily. Bittensor may eventually power many different killer apps. It may eventually support many different businesses, and it may eventually become part of many products. But the network itself may not be best understood as one clear consumer narrative. It may be much more like an open landscape in which many narratives compete. That's harder to explain, much harder to market as well, and harder to categorize, but possibly far more important if it works. And this is where I think the misunderstanding becomes costly. Because if you keep using the wrong lens, you may conclude this thing is too scattered, it lacks focus, it does too many things, it's not clear what the actual product is, And maybe that criticism would be fatal for a normal startup. But what if Bittensor is not failing to focus? What if it is general on purpose? That changes everything. Because then the diversity is not evidence of weakness, it's evidence that the system may be really general purpose. And general purpose systems are often the ones that end up mattering most. Again, the internet was not one product, Linux was not one product, Bitcoin was not one product in the startup sense. These things were deeper than that, and Bittensor may be trying to be deeper than that too. Not the app, but the layer on which many apps, services, models, agents, and digital industries can emerge. That's the type of idea that often looks messy early, because general systems almost always look messy early. They are too broad to fit neatly into existing categories. They seem chaotic because they are exploring many branches at once, and the outside observer, looking for a clean product narrative, often misses the real shape of what's happening. So if "what's the product" is not the best question, what is? I think the better questions are: what kind of markets can the system coordinate? What types of useful work can it reward? How well can it measure usefulness? Can it create sustainable subnet economies? Can it attract builders in many different categories? And can it become a base layer for digital industries rather than a single company? Those are much better questions because they match the object more closely. And once you ask those questions, Bittensor starts looking less like a confused startup and more like a very bold experiment in market design. So if I had to explain this in the simplest possible way, I would say most people try to understand Bittensor like this. What's the one thing it makes? But a better way to understand it is, what if Bittensor is a system for creating many small economies around different kinds of useful digital work permissionlessly? And that's much closer. And once you adopt that frame, a lot of things become easier to understand. Why there are many subnets, why they are so different, why tau as a token matters, why the network feels broad rather than narrow, why the opportunity, if real, may be much larger than one product category. Now, of course, this does not mean Bittensor automatically succeeds, because general purpose systems can fail, open incentive systems can be gamed, usefulness can be hard to measure, even though there's this UMA consensus thing that exists on Bittensor. There are many different challenges, of course. So I'm not saying because Bittensor is bigger than one product, it must win. I'm just saying something more modest. I'm saying that many people may be misunderstanding Bittensor because they are evaluating it with the wrong model. And if you use the wrong model, you can miss both the risk and the upside. Because the risk is not what if this product does not fit the market. The risk may be what if this whole coordination model fails. And the upside is not what if one app gets traction. The upside may be what if this becomes a new way of generating and coordinating many digital industries, which is a very, very different scale. So that's the thought I want to leave you with. Maybe Bittensor is not best understood as a company building a product. Maybe it's better understood as a system for generating many products, many services, and many digital economies. Maybe the reason so many people feel confused when they first encounter it is not because the system is empty, but because the system is too general to fit neatly into the categories they are used to. And if that's true, then one of the most important things you can do when studying Bittensor is this: stop asking only what's the product, and start asking what kind of innovation machine is this, because that may be the real question. And it may also be the reason Bittensor matters more than it first appears. So, if you want to explore these ideas further, you can visit my website, discoverbittensor.com. Thanks for tuning in, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.